We begin my week 4 rankings for running backs, at least the running backs from the remaining 30 teams left to play, with running backs that I think are probably mid to low end RB3s, but if they happen to score a touchdown, say, do you have the potential to finish maybe as a low end RB2 or even a high end RB3? And so we have Carson Steele, Javonte Williams, Justice Hill, Alexander Madison, Roshan Johnson, Tajay Spears, Zach Charbonnet, and Chase Brown. With Carson Steele, he faces off against the Chargers. It isn't the best matchup. However, with Isaiah Pacheco out, he did get a bunch of run in this past game. And so I think he's going to be getting a good amount of volume. It's just, admittedly, he isn't really as talented as Isaiah Pacheco, obviously. And so I don't think he possesses the most upside, but if he scores a touchdown, you're going to be pretty happy with him in your flex. With Javonte Williams, I'm really just guessing here. We don't know week to week as to who is going to get any amount of run in this Denver backfield. Tyler Beatty could be the guy this week, Jaleel McLaughlin. Essentially, it's been different every single week. And so, once again, this is just a guess. Somebody's going to score a reasonable amount of points from this backfield. It isn't a great matchup against the Jets, though. And so, if you have better options, which I hope you do in terms of, I hope Javonte Williams is at best your RB4, but if he is your RB3 and you're really needing somebody for the flex, you can try it, but it's anyone's guess as to who's going to be the back to own in Denver on a week-to-week basis, at least, until we get a little bit more consistency. With Justice Hill, I think the Ravens are going to be trailing in this game, and so I do think he's going to get a good amount of work as a pass catcher. Derrick Henry, as we all know, you can use him in the passing game, but he isn't really a dynamic receiver by any stretch of the imagination. And so I do think that Justice Hill provides a pretty safe floor, and if he scores a touchdown, you're going to be pretty happy with him in your flex. With Alexander Madison, it appears as though, at least if you have to own a running back from the Raiders backfield, that he is the guy to own. He gets to the goal line work. He's scored 3 touchdowns so far. It's a jumbled mess, kind of like the Denver backfield in terms of the splits. And so I don't think he possesses the best amount of upside, but he has been pretty good with the touchdowns so far. So I feel as though you'd probably be reasonably happy with him in your flex. With Roshan Johnson, it's been reported that he's going to get more usage this next week. It is an easy matchup against the Rams. I think they're going to do the best that they can to help out Caleb Williams by trying at least again to get the running game going. The offensive line is just not performing well, specifically the interior, but you couldn't really ask for a much better matchup. And so I think that he does offer a little bit of upside, and maybe he gets a goal line touchdown. With Tajay Spears, I do think that the Titans are going to be beating the Dolphins this week because the Dolphins don't have Tua. And so I think that both running backs in this game are going to get a good amount of usage on the ground and through the air. It's not the best matchup, but he's a pretty safe floor running back, and maybe he scores a touchdown this week. With Zach Charbonnet, this is under the assumption that Kenneth Walker is good to go. If Kenneth Walker ends up missing week 4, I probably have Zach Charbonnet right around running back 10 to 11. He's generally a top 10 back when Kenneth Walker III is out. And so I really don't like the matchup against Detroit. They're very tough against running backs. But the Seattle Seahawks offense is pretty good this season under Ryan Grubb, and he's a very safe floor play, even with Kenneth Walker. It's just that the ceiling isn't what it is when he's the featured back, obviously. With Chase Brown, I do think he's going to get a good amount of work in the passing game. Maybe he's efficient like he was in the running game this past week. It's a great matchup against the Panthers, and so if there's going to be a week in general where you can start Chase Brown with a little bit of upside, it's probably this week, but there are a ton of other running backs that I would prefer. But I do think he's a pretty safe floor play this week. These running backs are running backs that I think are probably high-end RB3s, but definitely could be RB2s. At 28, we have Braylon Allen, 27, J.K. Dobbins, 26, Rashad White, and 25, Jerome Ford. With Braylon Allen, he's playing Denver. It's a very good matchup. Breece Hall, for instance, every time he plays Denver, he destroys them. And so I think that Braylon Allen is going to have similar success. I just think that his workload isn't going to be quite good enough in general to be much better than an RB3 unless he happens to score a touchdown. And so if he does score a touchdown, that's where I think he could probably be an RB2 for us. With J.K. Dobbins, he is going to be very matchup dependent, in my opinion. This is a terrible matchup against Kansas City. He's a very talented back, and it's really nice to see that he's starting to stay healthy. At least let's cross our fingers because it's only been 3 weeks so far. But when he plays, he looks really good. It's just, I don't like this matchup against Kansas City. I think they're probably going to be losing this game. Uh, and yeah, if he scores a touchdown, he'll once again finish higher than this, but I don't project him to score a touchdown. I think he's going to get a couple receptions, though. With Rashad White here, this is under the assumption that Bucky Irving is good to go. I think that limits his workload, but I do think he gets a good amount of usage in the receiving game. If Bucky Irving is to miss this game, I would probably have him right around RB 17 to 18 because I think that raises his floor just a little bit. With him, he's probably the worst rusher of the football in the entire NFL, but he's a very, very good receiving back. And with them probably losing to the Eagles, in my opinion, and generally trailing in this game, I think he's going to get a good amount of receiving work, which raises his floor. I just don't think the ceiling is that high anymore. With Jerome Ford, it's a great matchup against Las Vegas. I don't project him to score a touchdown in this game, but if he does end up scoring a touchdown, he'll finish a lot higher than this. There are just running backs that get more overall volume that I would prefer ahead of him. Running backs that I think are probably low-end RB2s to potentially mid RB2s, but do have the upside to be low-end RB1s or high-end RB2s are Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, Zach Moss, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, and Travis Etienne. With Joe Mixon, he's playing Jacksonville. That is a good matchup on the surface. I do expect Houston to be winning this game. It's just with his injury, and now he is trending towards playing, I don't think he gets the full workload, which is why I have him projected just a little bit lower this week. I also don't think he scores a touchdown. I do think, though, in future weeks, he's going to be an elite RB1 for us. He's in a fantastic offense, and he's a very good running back. It's just that, once again, I don't think he gets a full workload this week. I think Cam Akers gets a little bit more work than usual. Chuba Hubbard plays Cincinnati this week. It's not the worst matchup, but it's definitely not inviting either. I think that he does present a solid floor this week. I just don't think he's going to have the massive week on the ground that he had the prior week. If he scores a touchdown, he finishes a little bit higher than this, but I don't project him to score. I think he's a very, very safe floor play, though. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. And so I think from a reception standpoint, you're going to like what you see this week. With Kenneth Walker, it's a terrible matchup against Detroit. I do think he'll play. I also think that Zach Charbonnet gets a little bit more run this week than he would normally get when Kenneth Walker plays. I think Kenneth Walker in a better matchup is a much higher running back in my rankings. It's just Detroit is absolutely brutal against the run. With Zach Moss, he's playing Carolina. I think he gets a good amount of volume. I do not have him projected to score a touchdown, but I do think they're going to be winning this game against Carolina, although I think it's going to be a lot closer now that Bryce Young's not at the quarterback position for them. But I think with Chase Brown being a lot more efficient in week 3, that he does get a little bit more work in week 4, and so I think that lowers Zach Moss's ceiling just a little bit, but I definitely think he's still by far and away the preferred back out of the two. With David Montgomery, I do think he scores a touchdown here against Seattle. I just don't think he's going to get much receiving work. I think they're probably going to be winning this game against Seattle, but I do think this is going to be a quite interesting game to watch this week. I'm pretty excited for it. With David Montgomery, he's a very safe floor player. He and Gibbs are one of the best RB duos in the entire NFL. And so if you have him, I'd start him confidently as an RB2, but if he's your flex play, you're really happy. With Josh Jacobs, it's a terrible matchup against Minnesota. He has not been the running back that we thought he could have been, but I think it's just due to the lack of touchdowns so far. I think that when Jordan Love is back, and I think Jordan Love does play in this game, we're going to see more touchdowns from him. I just don't think we have one from him this week against Minnesota. That Minnesota defense isn't a joke. But if you have Josh Jacobs, you drafted him probably as your RB1. If not, if you went RB heavy, he could be your RB2. But yeah, you got to play him anyways. It's just not the best matchup. With Travis Etienne against Houston, they are a little bit worse against the run than you would think. It's just that they played against the Bears, and the Bears have been so terrible at running the ball that it improved the overall rushing yards allowed statistics for them and touchdowns. And so it is a little bit better of a matchup than it might appear on paper, but it isn't the best matchup in the NFL. As long as they have this coaching staff here and one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, it's going to make it difficult for him to show off the incredible talent that he has. And so I think he's a solid volume play with a good amount of receptions this week against Houston because I think Jacksonville's going to be losing. I just don't think he scores a touchdown. And I think that better days are ahead from him. We just need to see an offensive change in Jacksonville. If you like what you're seeing, please feel free to like and subscribe. I chart out predictions for every single NFL game with the exception of Thursday night games and try to give us a reasonable expectation for what we could see this week from quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And if you like what you're seeing, please, once again, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you. Running backs that I think could be low-end RB1s, but could also fall into RB2 territory are Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson Jr., Ramondre Stevenson, James Cook, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and Jordan Mason. Najee Harris is going to have this backfield essentially to himself. Cordarrelle Patterson is going to get some usage, probably more so in the receiving game than that many carries per se. And it is a good matchup against Indianapolis. I just don't think he scores a touchdown. I think Justin Fields vultures that on the goal line this week. But I do think he's a very safe volume play. He'll have an incredibly safe floor in this game. And if he does score a touchdown, I do think he ends up being an RB1. And you're starting Najee Harris this week because, first of all, he's probably at worst your RB3. But then also, he's going to get probably the most work out of any game this week against Indianapolis. With Tony Pollard, he plays Miami. I do think he gets a lot of run this week, just like with Tyjae Spears. I don't think he scores a rushing touchdown, but I do think he gets a good amount of volume and a couple of receptions as well. I think that overall this offense leaves a lot to be desired because of Will Levis's struggles so far. But he's a very safe floor play, and he's probably getting a good amount of volume this week. With Brian Robinson Jr. against Arizona, it is a very good matchup for him. I do think Jaden Daniels, just like with Najee Harris below, I think Jaden Daniels steals a rushing touchdown on the ground, and so I don't think B-Rob scores this week, but he is going to get a lot of usage, and so I do think he's a decently high upside play, but there are just a couple running backs that I think are a lot more talented that I would have ahead of him. With Ramondre Stevenson against San Fran, the Patriots are likely to be losing this game. I don't think he scores a touchdown this week, but I do think he gets a lot of work in the receiving game, and I think he's a very safe floor play because he is probably the best skill position player on that offense for him. With James Cook, it's a pretty poor matchup against Baltimore. He's been great for us so far, though, especially in the receiving game. And those touchdowns, he's been really surprising to me. I thought Ray Davis was going to be snatching a lot of those rushing touchdowns. And so if you are a James Cook owner, you have to be really happy right now. I would temper expectations against Baltimore. He is really talented. I just don't like this matchup for him, but I think he's going to get a decent amount of work. With Derrick Henry against Buffalo, I do think he scores a rushing touchdown, but I do think his rushing output in terms of yardage and his receiving work is quite limited this week. And so this projection does have him scoring a touchdown. I just think that the game script probably isn't going to be so much in his favor this week against Buffalo because they're really good. With Jonathan Taylor against Pittsburgh, it's a terrible matchup. We loved what we saw from him this past week, though. We all knew he was an elite running back. He just needed to get in the groove of things. The offense in general is struggling. A-Rich has been very poor for them at quarterback. This week, he's so talented and he's going to get so much work that it's hard to have him too much lower than this. But I don't think he scores a touchdown. I just think he's going to get here on the back of a bunch of volume. With Jordan Mason, I don't have him scoring a touchdown this week, but he's a very high upside play. Any single week, he could potentially be the RB1. I just don't think he scores a touchdown. And so I think he has a good amount of volume this week and does get a good amount of yardage. Without the touchdown, I think he's probably a low-end RB1. Running backs that I think are probably mid to low-end RB1s, but do have the potential to be elite RB1s are Bijan, Jameer, Aaron Jones, and James Conner. Bijan Robinson faces off against New Orleans. It's not the best matchup. It should be a relatively high-scoring game. If anything, they might be trailing. And I think he's a very safe floor play. I think he gets plenty of receiving work. I don't project him for a touchdown, but I think he's going to get a good amount of yardage and total work overall. Jahmyr Gibbs faces off against Seattle. It's a pretty bad matchup, just like with David Montgomery, but they're both so talented that you are absolutely starting them, of course. I think he does get a touchdown this week. I just don't think that the rushing output is quite as efficient as we see some weeks. I do think he gets more receptions. He ended up scoring a receiving touchdown on a hook and ladder last week, but he didn't record a reception. I do think he gets a couple grabs this week, and so I think he's a very safe floor with a decent amount of upside play this week. It's just in a better matchup, I'd have him a lot higher. Aaron Jones faces off against his former team, the Green Bay Packers. It's a revenge game. I do have him scoring a touchdown. And if you have him, you are locked and loaded with him in your lineup. There is no way you can afford to sit him. I think he has a pretty good game. With James Conner facing off against the Washington Commanders, I think he's going to get a good amount of volume. As long as he stays healthy, he is a fine RB1 for us in fantasy football. I think he scores a touchdown. I think he gets a couple grabs. And I think overall he's very efficient in week 4. And we have our elite RB1s here. At 5, we have Kamara, 4, Devon Achane, 3, Kyren Williams, 2, Breece Hall, and 1, Saquon Barkley. Alvin Kamara faces off against the Atlanta Falcons. It's not a good matchup, but he's going to get a ton of volume in this game. He has every week. He's incredibly safe, and I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown. I just don't project one of those 40-point games from him this week, but yeah, he's been incredible so far for us in fantasy. With Devon Achane facing off against the Titans, I do think that he gets a ton of work, I think, especially as a receiver. I don't think he's going to be nearly as efficient on the ground now that they don't have Tua. As soon as Tua returns, I think we return to absolute sky-high potential every single week. But he's such a safe floor play, and he's so talented and fast that he could absolutely break a long touchdown at any point. And so you're starting him with confidence because he's just too talented to sit. With Kyren Williams against Chicago, I think he gets a ton of volume. With them not having Puka and Cooper Kupp, they leaned on him heavily in week 3. I suspect nothing to change at all. I think he scores, and it's a decent matchup against Chicago. I think that Chicago is going to put a lot of focus on him, but he is in such a good offense with Sean McVay that I think he gets a ton of receiving work in this game, and I just like him overall for the week. With Breece Hall against Denver, he tears up Denver every single time he plays them. Seriously, look up his career games versus Denver. I think he scores a long touchdown in this game. He's a must start every single week, but I think this week we're finally going to see a pretty high upside game from him. With Saquon Barkley against Tampa Bay, I think he's going to smash this week. He is my number 1 running back this week. He could go for 35 or 40 points in this game. He's going to get a ton of volume. It's going to be a high-scoring game. And if you have Saquon Barkley, if you drafted him in a redraft, you have a serious threat to be the RB1, either him or Kamara, and you have to be happy with what you've seen so far with him in this Eagles offense. What a wonderful thing for him to finally not be in one of the worst offenses imaginable. Imagine if he had been drafted by Philadelphia. Yeah, so regardless, though, you're starting him with confidence, and you should expect over 20 points, but he could definitely get you over 30. Running backs that I think are probably mid to low end RB3s are Carson Steele, Javonte Williams, Justice Hill, Alexander Madison, Roshan Johnson, Tyjae Spears, Zach Charbonnet, and Chase Brown. Remember with Zach Charbonnet, this is under the assumption that Kenneth Walker plays. If Kenneth Walker misses this game, he is probably right around RB10 to 11. Running backs that I think are probably high-end RB3s but could definitely finish as RB2s are Braylon Allen, J.K. Dobbins, Rashad White, and Jerome Ford. Running backs that I think are probably mid to low-end RB2s this week are Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, Zach Moss, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, and Travis Etienne. Running backs that I think could definitely finish as low-end RB1s are Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson, Ramondre Stevenson, James Cook, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and Jordan Mason. Running backs that I think are safe RB1s, but I would project to not be elite RB1s this week, are Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aaron Jones, and James Conner. Running backs that I think do finish as elite RB1s, who I think are heavy threats to be the RB1 overall this week, are Alvin Kamara, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, and Saquon Barkley. And that concludes my weekly running back rankings for week 4, at least the running backs on the 30 remaining teams left to play. Who is it that I have too low, too high in the rankings? Did I miss somebody entirely that should be on this list? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, if you like what you've seen and heard, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.